Fallout 76's Wastelanders DLC is really good. For me and many others, based off many of the reviews it has been seeing, it is a really quality experience, a great addition to Fallout 76, and making many users pretty hopeful as to what's to come next. Bethesda has mentioned numerous times at this point that Wastelanders isn't just one update, but also a framework for which they'll build off of in the future. And with that in mind, after 2 weeks with the DLC, I wanted to go over some of the things that I think could be improved in the future. Even though I would say the DLC overall is a really great and quality experience, it's not perfect. And in this video, I want to describe what I feel are some of the more lackluster, disappointing parts of this DLC. But again, not things that have to stay this way. It is an evolving game, so hopefully some of these aspects will be changed or improved on. If you guys enjoy the content, you can get subscribed. We are approaching 500,000 subscribers. Even further, I do have a link to my merch store down below. I think this is a pretty cool shirt if you want to buy it for yourself. One of the first things that I think Bethesda really could improve on with a future DLC, and something we know we're getting more of, are additional companions or allies. It was confirmed during the recent AMA that more allies are coming, although that doesn't really mean much. It could be 8 months down the road or 2. And there are several things that I think really just fell short with this aspect of the game. And funny enough, it really wasn't even that they're stuck at your camp. Of course, I think everyone would prefer companions that actually follow you around, but that's fine. There's engine restrictions, it is an online world, and I prefer this version than no version. When it comes to the named allies with Beckett and Sophia, there was this weird dynamic where their stories were immensely interesting. Finding out more about them, where they came from, the people they surround themselves with or used to surround themselves with Sophia's story in particular, I wanted to know what was next. There was a mystery there, and I didn't want to stop playing because I wanted to find out the answers. And despite this being an immensely interesting story, the actual quests you have to do in between the lore dumps that you get are painful. The vast majority of these quests are literally go to a location, get one item, fast travel back. The locations you were going to were basically just existing Fallout 76 locations, so a lot of times there'd be an enemy there, but it wasn't relevant or pertinent to the quest you were doing. It was just happened to be an enemy that lives there. So the gameplay component of this was horrible. I did not enjoy it at all, and the worst part was it takes a while. If you're on a high level character and have all of the fast travel points, it's still going to be a several hour experience, a lot of which is just spent in load screens or clearing out miscellaneous enemies to get to the objective. To me, the odd part of this all was I would think writing a compelling story that really draws you in is a lot more difficult than just creating a gameplay loop that isn't horrible. Bethesda really got the story part right of these, but when it came to the gameplay and your interaction in the story, it really left a lot to be desired. Typically the intro part and the finale of the quest were a bit more involved and a lot more interesting, but that middle 4-hour chunk could be a lot better. And hopefully this is something they learn from and improve on in the future. That was for the 2 main companions. When it comes to some of the more minor ones, something interesting or just odd I found was Bethesda chose to have random individuals be these minor companions instead of the numerous characters you interact with all throughout the main story that now literally serve no role whatsoever. This is something else I just found odd throughout Wastelanders overall. You are introduced to a plethora of extremely interesting characters that do have quite a bit of depth and backstory to them. In particular on the raider side of things, as you're doing those raider quests, a lot of it is very character focused, learning more about these individuals, and I loved it. The part about this that was odd was once you actually beat the story, although immediately after they'll have some dialogue, they otherwise just kind of stand there. And instead of this just random token raider that could be a minor companion and have like 5 voice lines at your camp, why not use that other character that you got a bunch of backstory, did questing with? I think Penelope, after beating the main story, would have made a really cool companion, rather than just the random settler forager that makes fart jokes. Maybe throw a few quests on Penelope that are relevant to her character, give her some dialogue, make her romanceable, and that would create a pretty cool arc. You go through the main story, you get to interact with her, and then there's a little bit more right after. The reason this seems so odd to me is it doesn't seem like it would have been that much more work for Bethesda, but it would have made this ally significantly more meaningful. Although in fairness, perhaps Bethesda does have other plans for these characters in the future. Perhaps there is going to be more quests around the raiders and the settlers and smaller DLCs, and regardless, I really hope they do. I think it'd be cool if we got to revisit some of these characters, or even let's just say there was a Penelope questline that came out, a few quests you could do for her just in one summer update. Then we have one that is actually seemingly getting addressed, so I'll be somewhat brief with it, but that is around the Wendigo Colossus and the gameplay involved with this brand new creature. So as far as the Wendigo Colossus itself or its design goes, I have no issues. I think it's a really cool creature that Bethesda did a good job with, and I'm happy to see it get added to the game. The more curious or questionable part to me was how it was added to the game. For the Wendigo Colossus to spawn, you have to nuke a certain assault random encounter point. There are several points like this around the map, with a few nuke zones actually encompassing 2 of these, so they become particularly prominent when trying to get this guy. The thing is though, it's a fairly low chance, it's only a 6% likelihood of this enemy spawning, but even further, the places where it is most likely, where you have those 2 encounter points, are otherwise crappy nuke zones. Like nuking this area, you'll see in the background, there's just not much going on. You'll find a few enemies, you'll clear them out, and then you're just literally wandering in circles, going to the random encounter point, then walking away so it unloads, then walking back in hopes of you hit that 6% likelihood for however long it takes. Nuke zones last 2 hours, so hypothetically you have 2 hours of chances. Once you actually get in the fight, it's cool, it's a true challenge. I think the rewards could be a little bit better, but regardless. The weird part is, despite it being so cool, the actual precursor to this, the nuke zones, then wandering around in circles among them, is just not very fun. And again, the nuke zones you would want to nuke if you're trying to farm this guy are otherwise kind of crappy nuke zones to begin with. But again, it seems like at some point this summer, the Wendigo Colossus is getting its own event. So this is one, although I do have complaints with it, should be resolved. Hopefully it'll be more straightforward, like the Scorched Beast Queen. You nuke an area, and then the Wendigo Colossus will pop out every time, and the whole server could come bask in its glory and have a nice tough fight. One of the more minor complaints I have around Wastelanders that I think just kind of rubbed me the wrong way was the use of unavailable content. I don't know if it's kind of meant to be silly or joking, but in the past, Bethesda has done this thing where in screenshots, they will use content that you can't actually get, like in little promotional images here or there. Seemingly that developer spawned it in and was just using it on their character. But now in Wastelanders, this is extended to other NPCs. You probably noticed while playing the game, you might see things like the marine armor helmet, or this cool looking balaclava, or even that little face mask you could find. None of that content is currently available to the players. Some of this content will probably be future microtransactions. Other things like the marine armor helmet are apparently coming. And even further, there are a variety of other outfits you could find on NPCs that are Atomic Shop only content. Again, some of which is publicly available, some of which was and no longer is. I think perhaps my frustration around this really stems from playing the past Fallout games, where it was pretty simple. You see an enemy wearing an outfit, you kill them, and you could get that outfit. In 76, it doesn't quite work that way, but the frustration is exemplified by the fact that there's no way to get that particular armor piece or outfit, whether that be through free in-game means or even on the Atomic Shop, and I would like this to be resolved in the future. I don't really mind Atomic Shop outfits being used on NPCs, it definitely is a cool advertising method, but at the very least allow me to buy it. Although again, that's one of the more nitpicky or minor ones, not really one of the major problems with this DLC, just something I would like to not see continued. But then we have the big discussion around the end game grind. This is probably the feature or aspect of the Wastelanders DLC to get the most backlash or complaints, as after you beat Wastelanders, you'll pretty quickly find that the end game grind can be timely. It takes a pretty good amount of time to get everything. This is one of those things that was kind of funny in that I think many people, especially those coming from the PTS, knew this would be an issue, but on launch, the game was really well received because people didn't get to this part yet. And from my perspective, I actually think I may have a somewhat different perspective on this than others, as I would say this endgame grind as it exists has definite pros and cons. Because prior to this, Fallout 76 did have a major endgame problem. The endgame lacked substance, it lacked directive or point for you to continue playing and grinding. You would just have a even better, higher tier build just because it's not like many enemies or events actually warranted being that god tier. But with this, you have genuine things to work towards. Cool new weapons, cool new armors, and it is a fairly long grind, being around 41 weeks for all plans, 22 weeks for just the core plan, so just the weapon, not all of its mods, and then just under 50 days if you're doing only dailies to grind out the reputation. Although one of the first things that kind of bothered me around this was I don't really hate the endgame grind, I just hate how everything is an endgame grind. Through all that promotional imagery and the teaser trailers we saw, Wastelanders looked awesome and all those new weapons looked even cooler. I wanted to play with those. I know though you do get access to a bow fairly early on. Otherwise, basically everything is at least several days of grinding away. I think making it so a few of the new weapons were just naturally spawned throughout the world, like the Gauss pistol was a good introductory that you could get for free, where the Gauss pistol and minigun you had to go through the endgame grind to actually receive. I think that dynamic would have been a bit more favorable. It would have made it feel as bad once you hit the final stage of the game. You're like, oh, it requires how much time to get all three of those? And I think that will be one of the problems with this. There'll be some players who will beat the main story and just not want to stick around just to grind out one gun, especially after they already played most of the new content. At that point, you're just grinding for a new weapon for what exactly? To stick around to grind for more weapons? Now, invariably, there will be additional DLCs, and that does provide good incentive, but until we see that roadmap, it does make really fully committing to several months of grinding kind of difficult to do, at least right now. But even further, the actual grind to get a good legendary endgame weapon does take a while. Of course, the first step will be to get the appropriate faction reputation or enough gold bullions, or in some cases, the faction reputation and enough gold bullions. Then once you do finally unlock the weapon, which may take a while depending on which it is or how many gold bullions you spent after that initial batch you get, you'll have to be able to craft it, which does require legendary script, incorporating that other currency which also does have a grind limit, only 200 per day. And towards the later part of Fallout 76, being relevant against boss tier enemies or just for your build overall, you're going to need a good roll of a weapon. How many legendary script it takes to get that good roll may range from hundreds to thousands, because you can no longer rely on the trade system of Fallout 76. None of these items are tradable, so you have to get it yourself. So even after you unlock the ability to craft this weapon, it still may be several weeks before you get one that even comes close to the other legacy weapons you are already using. Now overall, I don't think this grind is bad, but one of the issues I think is it might just be too long, where the challenge and the effort required to get to that endpoint where you have a good legendary of a new weapon might turn some people off from doing it at all. I know it's definitely starting to get to me. To get through all the faction dailies and get enough gold bullions per day is a several hour process. You'll jump onto the game and grind out a few dailies, grind out a few events, and it might take 2 to 3 hours. And this has pretty quickly started to feel like a chore or a job, in particular with the faction dailies. Similar to the ally quests, these basically constitute get a quest, go to point A, return to point B to turn in the quest. It's not really fun, it's not really interactive, which conversely, the gold bullion grind definitely has a lot more going for it. Doing events tends to be fun. One of the major issues with that side of things though is it's sometimes hard to actually find active events or other people doing events unless you already have a group. I found myself spending quite a bit of time just trying to find good servers with good events active. Something that Bethesda is probably fixing in the future with subsequent updates, so perhaps this is another one of those temporary problems that will be somewhat resolved. But I think it will be interesting to see in a couple of weeks how many people are still logging in daily to pursue this grind. After 2 weeks, there's already some people getting tired of it, so will they stick around for the full 40 to get absolutely everything? And I think a good way to resolve this somewhat is to make the grind not only shorter, but the content balance a bit more fair. Some of that content doesn't have to be locked behind the gold bullion system. But for me, what is the most concerning and my least favorite aspect of this system is how things locked behind gold bullions are not tradable. And even further, you could no longer scrap for mods for those weapons. Trading and getting weapons to scrap for mods are two fairly core aspects of this game, in particular trading among high levels. That's a huge part of the game and a very fun one. And I'm just not a fan of not being able to trade legendaries, and reportedly how Bethesda has no intent to actually lift these restrictions down the line. It now creates this weird scenario where a subset of weapons are just locked behind trade rules that others aren't. And one of the concerns I do have around this in the future is if Bethesda is truly planning to rely on all of this content for future updates, are future weapons also going to have those restrictions? Will the gold bullion system get expanded with the next big DLC, with all of those new weapons also being locked behind this? That would definitely hurt the economy. Trading weapons is basically one of the biggest parts of the economy. And even though they've explicitly stated there's no plans to lift these restrictions, I think it would make a lot more sense that maybe 3, 4, 5 months after an update comes out, you lift the trade restrictions and just make normal trading available. Or even a bit more of a compromise, simply make it so if both players already learn the plans for a weapon, they could trade those weapons with each other. So you still force people to do some of that grind to stay active on your game, but you could actually trade for them eventually and they'll be naturally integrated into the economy. This is one of those things that I think we'll see a lot of discussion on in the future. It's going to be a fairly large part of this DLC. The ability to actually get all of the content is pretty far away. Assuming you're not using any glitches or bugs, you have many more weeks of grinding to just get all the new weapons. And I don't think people are going to suddenly become more content with this, but rather the opposite. As people progress this grind, log in for that 2 to 3 hours of work each day, they'll become more and more frustrated with it. Although one of the other parts for this that is pretty interesting is actually not really a Wastelanders specific problem, but rather a problem Wastelanders failed to fix. And that is the underlying bugginess of Fallout 76 that hasn't gone away. Now overall, with the new Wastelanders content, a lot of it was mostly bug-free. I had bugs here and there, several of these Bethesda was seemingly already aware of and planning an update for, which is fine. A patch shortly after release to fix some of these things they couldn't get to prior to release is understandable. What isn't quite as understandable is a patch not coming until a full month to month and a half after the DLC drops, especially when it's in regards to glitches they knew about before the DLC even released. Now, not all these glitches or bugs that are just with the new story are major, but some of them are kind of annoying. The fast travel bug, the VATS bug, some of the issues with the Raider ending of the game, as well as many others that I didn't even personally encounter. There's an appropriate amount of time to address some of those, and a month plus is not that, especially when you're trying to impress players with a new DLC. This is one of those things that Bethesda has done several times now, and I just don't get it. But even further, on the other side of things, another lingering issue with this game are bugs or glitches causing the loss of items for players. This just being more issues that are present or prevalent with this game for one reason or another, probably the way it's coded, adding multiplayer to a single player engine. And all of that is bad, but what I think is far worse is Bethesda's reluctance or just claims that they're unable to actually restore lost items. To lose a full set of power armor, or even worse, to lose a god roll legendary from a in-game bug, create a support ticket, complain about it, provide video evidence, then have them hit you back with, sorry, we lack the tools to restore that item, despite the fact that other people have publicly stated they had items restored or their characters rolled back, is just insulting. On this aspect, it's really a two-pronged issue. One, that these bugs actually exist, but what is far worse is two, the reluctance for Bethesda's support to address them in an appropriate way. The lack of item control in this game has really hurt it, whether it be losing some of those items or even some of the dupe exploits or the many dupe exploits that seem to pop up at least every 1 to 2 months. And then that's just permanent damage on the economy. Ton of stuff is duped, Bethesda bans the dupers, prevents the dupe, and then all of those items just get flown out everywhere. The fact that a year and a half after release, that kind of stuff still isn't really addressed is a problem. But otherwise, yeah, those are my thoughts, my opinions on Wastelanders, what it needs to improve in the future. Not just Wastelanders, but Fallout 76 overall. This DLC did a lot right, but there are definitely some stuff it could do better, and hopefully Bethesda does do better. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments down below. Do you not agree with one of the points I make in this video? Do you have a different point that you think I should have brought up but didn't? But either way, with all of that being said, I thank you all again for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.